The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Josephine Zimmerman watched it disappear down the rutted road, taking with it the last of her family's money and her only way back to St. Louis. She stood at the edge of the settlement of Pinon, New Mexico Territory, in the scorching summer of 1878, with nothing but a worn carpetbag, $3 in coins, and the weight of her father's debts pressing down on her shoulders like the relentless southwestern sun. The town consisted of little more than a dusty main street lined with wooden buildings that seemed to lean into each other for support against the wind. A saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and a handful of other establishments comprised the whole of civilization in this corner of the territory. Beyond the town, the landscape stretched endlessly in shades of brown and gold, dotted with pinon pines and juniper trees that clung stubbornly to the rocky soil. Josephine was 20 years old, with dark auburn hair that she kept pinned beneath a faded blue bonnet and green eyes that had seen too much hardship in too short a time. Her father had died 6 months ago in St. Louis, leaving her alone and penniless. An aunt in Denver had promised her work as a seamstress, but the letter had been a lie, Josephine discovered too late. The aunt had died 3 years prior, and no one in Denver knew anything about any promised employment. She had used the last of her money to get this far, hoping to find work somewhere along the way. The proprietor of the boarding house had looked her up and down with calculating eyes when she inquired about a room. $3 a week, the woman had said, her voice as dry as the desert air. In advance, Josephine had counted out the coins slowly, knowing she was handing over her last safety net. "I need work," she had said quietly. "Any work. Do you know of anything?" The woman had pocketed the coins and shrugged. "Nothing for a woman alone. This is ranch country, men's work." That first night, Josephine had lain awake in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the saloon down the street and wondering what on earth she was going to do. By morning, she had a plan. It was not much of a plan, but it was something. The hills around Pinon were carpeted with wildflowers despite the harsh climate. Purple verbena, golden desert marigolds, pink evening primrose, and bright red Indian paintbrush bloomed in defiant splashes of color against the austere landscape. Josephine spent that first day walking the outskirts of town, gathering armfuls of the flowers and fashioning them into small bouquets tied with strips of fabric she tore from her spare petticoat. The next morning, she positioned herself at the edge of town where the main road came in from the north, the direction from which most travelers and ranch hands approached. She spread a blanket on the ground and arranged her bouquets carefully, each one as perfect as she could make it. Then she sat down to wait, her bonnet shading her face from the sun, and prayed that someone, anyone, would want to buy flowers in this hard land. The first day, no one stopped. Cowboys rode past without a glance. A family in a wagon looked at her with suspicion and hurried on. By sunset, she had sold nothing and walked back to the boarding house with her arms full of wilting flowers. The second day was much the same. A few people slowed to look, but no one reached for their coin purse. Josephine kept her chin up and her smile in place, even as doubt gnawed at her insides. She had 4 days left before her room payment ran out. On the third day, as the morning sun climbed higher and the heat began to shimmer off the hard, packed road, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. As he drew closer, Josephine could see he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a black hat tipped low against the sun. His horse was a magnificent bay gelding, well-groomed and clearly expensive. The rider slowed as he approached her makeshift flower stand, and Josephine felt her heart begin to beat faster. She stood up, brushing dust from her skirt, and tried to look welcoming rather than desperate. "Morning, madam," the man said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and carried a hint of Texas in its drawl. As he looked down at her from his saddle, Josephine saw that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 27 or 28, with strong features tanned dark by the sun and eyes the color of clear amber. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and there was something both kind and guarded in his expression. "Good morning, sir," Josephine replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Would you care for some wildflowers, fresh picked this morning?" He looked at her flower display, then back at her face, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You new to Pinyon?" "Yes, sir. Just arrived 3 days ago. Family here." "No, sir. Just myself." Something shifted in his expression, though she could not quite read what it meant. He dismounted in one fluid motion and walked over to examine her bouquets more closely. Up close, she could see the quality of his clothes, the silver conchos on his belt, the well-oiled leather of his boots. This was a man of means, she realized. "How much?" he asked, gesturing to a bouquet of desert marigolds mixed with purple verbena. 10 cents, Josephine said, then worried she had priced them too high. He pulled a coin from his pocket and handed it to her, taking the bouquet. For a moment their fingers brushed and Josephine felt an unexpected jolt of warmth at the contact. She stepped back quickly, clutching the coin. "Thank you, sir. Thank you very much." He nodded, holding the flowers somewhat awkwardly, as if he was not quite sure what to do with them now that he had them. Then he looked back at her display, at all the carefully arranged bouquets, at the worn blanket and her faded dress, and the hope barely concealed in her eyes. "How much for all of them?" he asked suddenly. Josephine blinked. "I'm sorry, all the flowers. How much for the whole lot?" She did a quick count. She had made 23 bouquets. At 10 cents each, that would be $2.30, more money than she had seen in weeks. $2.30, she said, barely daring to breathe. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 silver dollars, pressing them into her palm. "Keep the change," he said. "And don't sell flowers by the roadside anymore. It is not safe for a woman alone." Before she could respond, he had gathered up all her bouquets in his arms, remounted his horse with practiced ease despite his armload of flowers, and rode off toward town, leaving Josephine standing in stunned silence with 3 silver dollars clutched in her hand. She wanted to call after him, to tell him she had no choice, that selling flowers was the only idea she had, but he was already too far away. And besides, what could she say? He was right. It was not safe. She knew that. But safety was a luxury for people who had options, and she had none. That night, she counted her money carefully. With what she had earned, she could pay for another week at the boarding house and have a little left over for food. But then what? She could not survive on wildflowers indefinitely. She needed a real solution, a real job, a real plan. The next morning, she went out to gather more flowers anyway. What else could she do? She was arranging her new bouquets on the blanket when she heard hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw the same rider from yesterday, this time leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a patient eye. He dismounted and walked over to her, his expression serious. "I thought I told you not to do this anymore." Josephine lifted her chin, a spark of defiance flaring in her chest. "I appreciate your concern, sir, but I have to make a living somehow. Doing this," he gestured at her flower display. "You will make pennies and you will put yourself in danger. Do you know what kind of men travel this road? The kind who might buy flowers," she suggested, knowing even as she said it how foolish it sounded. His mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "You have spirit, I will give you that." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internally, then said, "My name is Quinton Irving. I own the Triple I Ranch about 8 miles north of here. I have a housekeeper who is getting on in years and could use help with the cooking and cleaning. The pay is $12 a month plus room and board. If you want the job, it is yours." Josephine stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. $12 a month was decent wages, and room and board meant she would not have to worry about where her next meal was coming from or where she would sleep. It was exactly what she needed. It was too good to be true. "Why?" she asked, suspicion warring with hope. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I know you are alone in a hard place, trying to make an honest living," Quinton said. "I know you have the grit to sit out here day after day even though no one is buying. And I know my housekeeper, Mrs. Patricia Chen, actually could use the help. She is 63 years old and has been with my family since I was a boy. She will not admit it, but the work is getting too much for her." He paused. "I also know that if you keep doing this, sooner or later something bad will happen. The Triple I is a respectable place. You will be safe there, and you will earn honest wages." Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. "I accept," she said, her voice only slightly unsteady. "Thank you, Mr. Irving. You will not regret this." "Call me Quinton," he said. "And that mare is for you. Her name is Clover. She is gentle and sure-footed." "Can you ride?" "A little," Josephine admitted. "It has been a while." "You will remember," Quinton assured her. "Gather your things from wherever you are staying and meet me back here in an hour. We will ride out to the ranch before the heat of the day gets too bad." He paid for all her flowers again, another $3, and rode back toward town, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the patient mare, and a feeling that her entire life had just pivoted on an invisible axis. An hour later, her few possessions packed in her carpet bag and tied behind Clover's saddle, Josephine rode out of Pinyon beside Quinton Irving, heading north toward a future she could not quite imagine. The ride to the Triple I took them through country that was both harsh and beautiful. Rocky hills dotted with pinyon, and juniper gave way to rolling grassland, where cattle grazed in scattered groups. Quinton pointed out landmarks as they rode a distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed that would run wild during the summer rains, the far boundary of his land marked by a line of fence posts marching toward the horizon. "How long have you owned the ranch?" Josephine asked, making conversation to fill the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "The ranch has been in my family for 18 years, Quinton said. "My father, Marcus Irving, bought the land and built it up from nothing. He died 2 years ago, left everything to me. I have been running it on my own since then. I am sorry about your father. Thank you." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "He was a good man, tough but fair. He built something worth having out here, and I aim to keep it going." "Do you have any siblings?" "A sister, Rachel. She is married to a banker in Santa Fe, has 3 children. We write letters, see each other once or twice a year." He glanced at her. "What about you? You said you had no family here. Do you have family elsewhere?" Josephine hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding the truth. "My mother died when I was 12. My father raised me in St. Louis. He was a clerk, worked for a shipping company. He died 6 months ago. There was debt. I had to sell everything to pay it off, and even then there was not enough. I heard from an aunt in Denver who said she could give me work, so I used the last of my money to come west. But when I arrived in Denver, I found out she had died 3 years ago. Someone had been using her name, I suppose, as some kind of cruel joke, or perhaps it was an honest mistake. Either way, I had no money to get back to St. Louis, so I have been working my way south, trying to find something, anything. I ended up in Pinyon with my last $3. Quinton was silent for so long that Josephine began to worry she had said too much, revealed too much of her desperation. But when he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "That takes courage," he said. "Coming west alone, not knowing what you would find, a lot of people would have given up." "I thought about it," Josephine admitted. "More than once, but giving up seemed even harder than keeping going." "Well, you are here now," Quinton said, "and you have a place at the Triple I for as long as you want it." They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, and as the ranch house came into view, Josephine felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. The house was a sprawling adobe structure with a wide front porch and a red tile roof. Outbuildings surrounded it, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, storage sheds. It was a working ranch, clearly prosperous, and Josephine felt a wave of gratitude toward this man who had given her a chance when she had nowhere else to turn. Mrs. Chen came out onto the porch as they rode up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a small, sturdy woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a bun and sharp, dark eyes that missed nothing. Her family had come from China to work on the railroads, and she had made her way to New Mexico territory through her own grit and determination. When Quinton's father had hired her 20 years ago, it had caused some talk in town, but Marcus Irving had not cared what people thought, and neither had his son. "So you found a helper," Mrs. Chen said, looking Josephine up and down with frank assessment. "She looks half-starved. Does she eat?" "I eat," Josephine said, climbing down from Clover a bit stiffly. "And I work hard, Mrs. Chen. I promise you won't regret having me here." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. "We will see about that. Come inside. You look like you could use a decent meal and a soft bed." "Quinton, see to the horses." "Yes, madam," Quinton said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Josephine followed Mrs. Chen into the house, which was cool and dim after the brightness outside. The main room was large, with exposed wooden beams and whitewashed walls. Simple furniture filled the space, a large table, comfortable chairs, shelves lined with books. It was a man's house, but it was clean and well kept, and it felt like a home. Mrs. Chen led her to a small room off the kitchen. "This will be yours," she said. "It is not much, but it is private. You will share the pump with me for washing. Outhouse is behind the main house. Meals are at sunrise, noon, and sunset. You will help me with the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the garden, and anything else that needs doing. Sundays you have the afternoon to yourself after lunch is cleaned up." "Questions?" "No, madam. Thank you, madam." Mrs. Chen nodded. "Good. Unpack your things, wash up, and come to the kitchen. I will make you something to eat." Josephine's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the yard. She unpacked her meager belongings quickly, splashed water on her face and hands, and went to find the kitchen. Mrs. Chen had laid out bread, cheese, cold meat, and apples on the table. "Sit," she ordered. "Eat." Josephine sat and ate, trying not to wolf down the food even though she was hungrier than she had realized. Mrs. Chen watched her with those sharp eyes, occasionally nodding as if confirming something to herself. "You have worked in a house before?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Yes, madam. I kept house for my father for 8 years before he died. I can cook, clean, sew, do laundry, tend a garden. I am a hard worker." "We will see," Mrs. Chen said again, but her tone was less skeptical now. "Quinton is a good man, fair employer, does not make promises he cannot keep. You do your work, stay out of trouble, and you will be fine here." "I intend to," Josephine said. Over the next weeks, Josephine settled into life at the Triple I Ranch. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for Quinton and the handful of ranch hands who worked the property. After breakfast, there was cleaning to do, floors to sweep, dishes to wash, beds to make, laundry to scrub and hang. In the afternoons, she helped in the garden, tended the chickens, and learned how to make the simple, hearty meals that Mrs. Chen had perfected over the years. The work was hard, but it was honest, and for the first time in months, Josephine felt secure. She had a roof over her head, food in her belly, and wages coming. More than that, she had purpose. She saw Quinton every day, of course, but their interactions were brief and professional. He would come in for meals, exchange a few words with Mrs. Chen about what needed doing, and then head back out to work. He was a man who did not sit still, Josephine noticed. He was always fixing something, checking on cattle, riding the fence line, working alongside his men. He led by example, and his men respected him for it. Despite the brevity of their interactions, Josephine found herself noticing things about him. The way he always thanked Mrs. Chen for meals, the patience he showed with a nervous colt in the corral, the fairness with which he treated his ranch hands, who were a mix of Mexican vaqueros, a freed slave named Thomas, who was one of the best horsemen Josephine had ever seen, and a handful of white cowboys who had drifted in from Texas and Arizona. One evening, about 3 weeks after Josephine had arrived at the Triple I, she was sitting on the back porch shelling peas for dinner when Quinton came around the corner of the house, leading a limping horse. "What happened?" Josephine asked, setting down her bowl and coming over to look. "Stone bruise, I think," Quinton said, running his hand down the horse's leg. "He will be fine with a few days' rest." "Can I help?" Quinton glanced up at her, surprise flickering in his amber eyes. "You know horses, a little. My father kept a horse when I was young. I used to help care for him." "All right, then." Quinton straightened. "Hold his head while I check his hoof." Josephine took the halter rope and stroked the horse's nose, murmuring soft words while Quinton lifted the hoof and examined it carefully. This close, she could smell the leather and dust and sweat on him, could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun. He had capable hands, she noticed, scarred and calloused but gentle as they probed the horse's hoof. "There it is," he said finally, using his knife to carefully remove a small stone wedged in the frog of the hoof. "That should feel better soon, boy." He lowered the hoof and straightened, meeting Josephine's eyes. They stood there for a moment, closer than they had been since the day he had bought all her flowers by the roadside, and Josephine felt that same unexpected jolt of warmth she had felt then. "Thank you for your help," Quinton said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Of course," Josephine replied, suddenly acutely aware of how she must look after a long day's work, hair escaping its pins, dress dusty, face probably smudged. She stepped back quickly, releasing the horse. "I should get back to those peas." "Josephine," Quinton said, and the sound of her name in his mouth made something flutter in her chest. "You are settling in well. Mrs. Chen says you are a good worker. I am glad you came to the Triple I." "Thank you," Josephine managed. "I am glad too, gladder than you know." He nodded, then led the horse away toward the barn, and Josephine returned to her peas with hands that were not quite steady. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Josephine forced herself to think clearly about what was happening. She was developing feelings for Quinton Irving, that much was obvious. But she was his employee, dependent on him for her livelihood and her shelter. Any feelings she had needed to be carefully controlled and hidden. She could not afford to jeopardize her position here, not when she had nowhere else to go. But knowing she should not feel something and actually not feeling it were two different things, Josephine discovered over the following weeks. She found herself watching for Quinton, listening for his voice, looking forward to meals when he would be at the table. She noticed the way he smiled, rare, but warm when it came. She noticed how his whole face changed when he was amused. years falling away to reveal the younger man he must have been before responsibility settled on his shoulders. And sometimes she caught him watching her too, his amber eyes thoughtful and intent in a way that made her breath catch. Summer deepened into the intense heat of July and August. The work on the ranch continued relentlessly, cattle to be moved to better grazing, fences to be mended, preparations to be made for the fall roundup. Josephine's days fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and satisfying. One afternoon, Mrs. Chen announced she needed to go into Pinyon to visit her niece who had recently had a baby. "You will manage dinner?" she asked Josephine. "Of course," Josephine assured her. "Go, stay as long as you like, we will be fine." With Mrs. Chen gone, the house felt different, quieter. Josephine prepared the evening meal: beef stew, cornbread, and dried apple pie, and set the table in the dining room rather than the kitchen, which was stifling in the heat. The ranch hands ate in the bunkhouse most nights, so it was just Quinton who came in as the sun was setting, dusty and tired from a long day. He washed up at the pump outside and came to the table, raising an eyebrow when he saw the food laid out. "This looks wonderful," he said. "You have been learning from Mrs. Chen." "I had a good teacher," Josephine said, serving him a generous portion. "How was the work today?" "Hot," Quinton said with feeling. "We moved the cattle to the north pasture, found a section of fence down on the east side that will need fixing tomorrow." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and then Quinton said, "I never asked you, do you miss St. Louis?" Josephine considered the question. "I miss my father," she said finally. "I miss the person I was when he was alive, when I had a home and a future I thought I understood. But St. Louis itself? No, not really. I never quite fit there. My father was educated, but we never had money. We existed in this strange in-between place, not quite respectable enough for society, but not poor enough to disappear into the working class. After he died, I realized I had no real friends there, no one who cared what happened to me. Coming west was terrifying, but it was also freeing in a way. I got to decide who I wanted to be." "And who do you want to be?" Quinton asked, his eyes intent on her face. "Someone useful," Josephine said immediately. "Someone who takes care of herself, who does not need to depend on anyone. Someone strong." "You are already all those things," Quinton said quietly. Josephine felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Thank you." "I mean it," Quinton said. "What you did, coming west alone, surviving when you had nothing, that took strength most people never have to find in themselves. You should be proud." "I just did what I had to do," Josephine said, uncomfortable with the praise. "That is what strength is," Quinton said. "Doing what needs to be done, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." The conversation drifted to other topics: books they had read, places they had been, dreams they harbored. Josephine discovered that Quinton had an unexpected love of poetry, particularly Whitman, and that he had ambitions to expand the ranch, to breed better cattle and improve his herd. He discovered that Josephine had always wanted to learn to play piano, that she could draw surprisingly well, and that she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, Quinton lingered at the table instead of heading back outside. "Would you like to sit on the porch?" he asked. "It is cooler out there." "That would be nice," Josephine said, her heart beating faster. They sat on the wide front porch as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear overhead, impossibly bright without the city lights to dim them. The night air was finally cooling, bringing relief from the day's heat. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. "It is beautiful here," Josephine said softly. "I never knew the world could be so big." "That is what I love about this land," Quinton said. "It does not care who you were before you came here." It only cares about who you are now, what you can do. There is a freedom in that. Is that why your father came here? Part of it. He grew up poor in Georgia, worked other men's land his whole young life, and never had anything to call his own. He wanted something different. He wanted to build something that would last, something he could pass on. So he came west, found this land, and carved out a place for himself through sheer stubbornness and hard work. He would be proud of what you have done with it, Josephine said. I hope so, Quinton said. Sometimes I wonder if I am doing enough, if I am making the right choices. Running a ranch is not just about working hard. You have to make decisions that affect people's livelihoods, their futures. That is a weight. You care about doing right by people, Josephine observed. That is what makes you a good man and a good employer. Quinton turned to look at her, and in the starlight his face was shadowed and serious. You really believe that? I do, Josephine said firmly. You gave me a chance when I had nothing and no one. You treat your workers fairly. You honor your word. Yes, I believe it. Josephine, Quinton said, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. He reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and rough against hers. I need to tell you something, and I hope it will not make things difficult between us. Josephine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. What is it? From the first moment, I saw you sitting by that roadside with your flowers. Something in my heart recognized something in yours, Quinton said, his words coming slowly, as if he was picking his way carefully through difficult terrain. I told myself I was just helping someone in need, that it was the decent thing to do. And it was. But it was also more than that. These past weeks, having you here, getting to know you, Josephine, I have developed feelings for you that go beyond employer and employee. I understand if you do not feel the same way. I understand if this makes you uncomfortable. But I could not keep it to myself any longer. You deserve to know the truth. For a moment, Josephine could not speak. Her mind was reeling, joy and disbelief warring within her. You have feelings for me. She finally managed. I do, Quinton said simply. Strong feelings. If I am being completely honest, I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day. Quinton, Josephine whispered. And then she was leaning forward and he was meeting her halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and tentative and full of promise. It was Josephine's first real kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and more sweet and warm and right. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Quinton rested his forehead against hers. Tell me I have not misread this, he said. Tell me you feel something too. I feel everything, Josephine said, her voice thick with emotion. I have been trying so hard not to, trying to be professional and proper, but Quinton, I have been falling in love with you too. I just never thought you could feel the same way about someone like me. Someone like you, Quinton pulled back to look at her, confused. Josephine, you are one of the strongest, most capable, most remarkable women I have ever met. Why would I not fall in love with you? Because I came here with nothing, Josephine said. Because I was selling flowers by the roadside like some beggar. Because I am your employee, dependent on you for everything. You came here with something more valuable than money, Quinton said firmly. You came with courage and determination and integrity. And as for being my employee, if it makes you uncomfortable, we can change that. You could be my partner instead, my wife if you will have me. Josephine's breath caught. Quinton, we have known each other barely 2 months. I know, Quinton said. And if you want to wait, if you need more time, I will understand, but I also know my own heart. I know what I want. And I want you, Josephine Zimmerman. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to face whatever comes with you at my side. But only if that is what you want too. Josephine looked at him, at this good, honest man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray, and she knew her answer. Life was too uncertain, too fragile, to waste time with unnecessary waiting. She had already learned that lesson the hard way. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Quinton Irving. Yes to all of it." The smile that broke across Quinton's face was like sunrise, and when he kissed her again, it was with a passion and tenderness that made Josephine feel cherished and desired and home. They sat on the porch for hours that night, talking and planning and stealing kisses, until finally Quinton reluctantly said he should let her get some sleep. But before he left, he pulled her close one more time. "I love you, Josephine," he said. "I want you to know that and believe it. You are not alone anymore. You will never be alone again." Tears slipped down Josephine's cheeks, and she did not try to hide them. "I love you too," she whispered. "More than I knew I could love anyone." When Mrs. Chen returned the next afternoon, she took one look at Josephine's glowing face and Quinton's barely contained smile and said, "Well, it is about time." They were married 3 weeks later in Pinyon, in the small church at the edge of town. Mrs. Chen stood up with Josephine, and Thomas, the ranch foreman, stood up with Quinton. Most of the town turned out for the wedding, curious about the flower girl who had won the heart of the successful rancher. Josephine wore a dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make from fabric Quinton had insisted on buying a beautiful blue cotton that brought out the green in her eyes. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind she had been selling by the roadside the day Quinton rode into her life. As she walked down the aisle toward where Quinton stood waiting for her, tall and handsome in his best suit, Josephine thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. 3 months ago, she had been alone and desperate, wondering if she would survive. Now she was surrounded by friends, marrying a man she loved more than she had known it was possible to love another person, starting a new chapter of her life. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. When Quinton slipped a gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, Josephine believed him with her whole heart. And when she made her own promises in return, she meant every word. After the wedding, there was a celebration at the ranch. The hands had strung up lanterns and moved tables outside for a feast. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Josephine had never been happier. She danced with Quinton under the stars, his arms strong around her, his smile just for her, and felt like the luckiest woman alive. That night, in the room they now shared, Quinton was gentle and patient as he made love to his bride for the first time. Josephine had been nervous, not knowing quite what to expect, but Quinton took his time, murmuring words of love and reassurance, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness and passion that brought tears to Josephine's eyes. Afterward, lying in Quinton's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Josephine knew she had found where she belonged. Life as Mrs. Irving was different from life as a hired girl, but Josephine insisted on continuing to help with the household work. Mrs. Chen had become like a grandmother to her, and Josephine could not imagine not working alongside her. Mrs. Chen grumbled that it was not proper for the lady of the house to be doing servant's work, but Josephine could tell she was secretly pleased. As autumn came and the heat of summer began to fade, the rhythm of ranch life continued. Quinton and his men brought the cattle down from the high pastures for the fall roundup and branding. Josephine learned to ride better, and Quinton taught her about the ranch, showing her how he kept the books, explaining his plans for the future. He wanted her input, her thoughts, her partnership in every sense of the word. In November, Josephine realized that her monthly courses had not come. She waited another few weeks to be sure before saying anything to Quinton, but when she was certain, she told him one evening after dinner. "Quinton," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "we are going to have a baby." The look of wonder and joy on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. "A baby," he repeated as if he could not quite believe it. "Josephine, are you certain?" "I am certain," she said, laughing at his expression. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Quinton pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed. A baby, our baby." He pulled back to look at her. "How do you feel? Are you well? Do you need anything?" "I feel wonderful," Josephine assured him. "A little tired sometimes, but Mrs. Chen says that is normal. She is already planning on how to turn the small room next to ours into a nursery." Over the winter months, Josephine's body changed as the baby grew inside her. Quinton became even more attentive, if that was possible, constantly worrying about her and making sure she was not overworking herself. Mrs. Chen clucked over her like a mother hen, making sure she ate properly and rested enough. On a warm day in late May of 1879, after a long labor attended by Mrs. Chen and the local midwife, Josephine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Marcus, after Quinton's father, and he had his father's amber eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Quinton held his son for the first time with hands that shook slightly, looking down at the tiny, perfect face with an expression of absolute awe. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "Josephine, he is perfect." "He is," Josephine agreed, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "He is ours." Marcus was a healthy, happy baby who rarely fussed and seemed to find the whole world endlessly interesting. Quinton was a devoted father, despite his demanding work on the ranch. He would often come in from a long day to find Josephine nursing the baby, and he would sit beside them, running a gentle finger over Marcus's tiny hand, marveling at how small and precious he was. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Quinton admitted one evening, watching Marcus sleep in his cradle. "I thought I understood what love was when I married you, but this having a child with you, it is like my heart has expanded to hold even more." "I know exactly what you mean," Josephine said, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Sometimes I look at him and I can hardly believe he is real, that we made him." As Marcus grew from infant to toddler, life at the Triple I continued its steady rhythm. The ranch prospered under Quinton's careful management. He expanded the herd, improved the breeding stock, and built a reputation for quality cattle that reached beyond New Mexico territory. Josephine proved to be a valuable partner, keeping the household accounts and often accompanying Quinton to town to conduct business. The people of Pinyon, who had initially been curious about the flower girl who married the rancher, came to respect Mrs. Irving as a capable, intelligent woman who was as much a part of the ranch's success as her husband. Mrs. Chen doted on young Marcus, and the feeling was mutual. The boy's first word was not mama or papa, but Chen, much to everyone's amusement. When Marcus was 2 years old, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was less nervous about what to expect, and the pregnancy went smoothly. In the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's steady temperament. The years passed in a blur of busy, happy activity. Marcus grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father around the ranch like a shadow, already learning about cattle and horses and the land. Sarah was quieter than her brother but equally determined, with a stubborn streak that reminded Quinton of Josephine. Mrs. Chen, growing frailer with age, finally agreed to retire from most of her duties when Marcus was 7 and Sarah was 5. "I am too old to be chasing after children," she said. though she still insisted on supervising dinner preparations and offering advice on household matters. Josephine hired a young woman from Pinyon to help with the increased workload, but Mrs. Chen remained part of the family, a beloved grandmother figure to the children. One evening in the summer of 1886, Quinton and Josephine sat on their porch watching the sunset, much as they had on the night they had first confessed their feelings to each other 8 years earlier. Marcus and Sarah were playing in the yard under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye, their laughter carrying on the warm air. "You ever think about that day I first saw you by the roadside?" Quinton asked, reaching over to take Josephine's hand. "Sometimes," Josephine admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like I was a completely different person." "In some ways you were," Quinton said. "We both were. But in the ways that matter most, you are still the same woman who sat there day after day, refusing to give up even when things looked hopeless. That is the woman I fell in love with. And you are still the man who bought all my flowers and then bought my heart along with them," Josephine said with a smile. "Though I think my heart was already half yours before you even paid me that first dime." "I knew from that moment I wanted to protect you," Quinton said. "I saw you sitting there, trying so hard to be brave, and something in me just knew. You were mine to care for, mine to love. I know that sounds presumptuous." "It sounds romantic," Josephine corrected. "And true. We were meant to find each other, Quinton. I truly believe that. Everything that happened, losing my father, the failed trip to Denver, ending up in Pinyon with nothing at all, led me to you. To this life. To our children. I would not change a single moment of it, not even the hard parts. Not even selling wildflowers by the roadside," Quinton teased gently. "Especially not that," Josephine said firmly. "Because that is when you found me. That is when our story really began." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, each lost in their own thoughts about how far they had come and how blessed they were. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to the cold, dry summers when water was scarce, and they had to drive the herd to farther pastures, seasons when money was tight, and Josephine and Quinton stayed up late worrying over the account books. But there were also good years, when the cattle were fat and the prices were high, when the summer rains came exactly when they were needed, when everything seemed to go right through it all. Their love remained steady and strong. They had their disagreements. Of course, Josephine thought Quinton took too many risks sometimes, and Quinton thought Josephine worried too much about money. But they had learned early in their marriage how to talk things through, how to listen to each other, how to compromise. More than that, they had learned how to forgive and how to laugh together, even in difficult times. When Marcus turned 16 in 1895, he formally became his father's partner in running the ranch. The boy had grown into a capable young man, tall and strong like his father, with a natural gift for working with horses and cattle. Sarah, at 13, was already showing her mother's head for numbers and often helped Josephine with the household accounts. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1897, at the age of 82. The entire household mourned her loss deeply. She had been part of the family for so long that it was hard to imagine life without her sharp tongue and wise counsel. They buried her in the small cemetery outside Pinyon, and Josephine made sure fresh wildflowers were placed on her grave every week. "She gave me a chance when I came here," Josephine said to Quinton the day after the funeral. "She was gruff, but she was kind. She taught me everything I know about running a household. She was like a mother to me." "She loved you like a daughter," Quinton assured her, holding his grieving wife close. "She told me once that bringing you here was one of the best decisions I ever made." She said you brought light back into this house after my father died. As the new century approached, the world was changing rapidly. The railroad had come through Pinyon, bringing easier access to markets, but also bringing more people and more competition. The Wild West of their younger days was slowly being tamed, becoming more civilized and less dangerous. Quinton adapted to the changes, finding new ways to market their cattle and keep the ranch profitable. Marcus met and married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth from Santa Fe in 1899, and they built a house on the ranch property near the main house. Within a year, they had made Quinton and Josephine grandparents with the birth of a daughter they named Lily. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Josephine was overwhelmed with emotion. She thought of her own journey from that desperate young woman selling flowers by the roadside to this moment grandmother, ranch owner, matriarch of a family that she and Quinton had built together through love and hard work. "What are you thinking?" Quinton asked, sitting beside her as she cradled baby Lily. "I am thinking about how blessed I am," Josephine said softly. "How blessed we are. All those years ago, when I was sitting by that roadside with my wildflowers, I could never have imagined this life. I could never have imagined so much happiness." "I could have," Quinton said, reaching over to gently touch his granddaughter's tiny hand. "From the moment I saw you, I could imagine everything. Building a life with you, growing old with you, watching our family grow. It was all there in my mind, like a dream I knew would come true." "You always were the romantic one," Josephine teased gently. "Only with you," Quinton said. "You are the only woman who ever made me want to dream impossible dreams." Sarah married in 1902 to a young lawyer from Albuquerque named James Carter. Unlike her brother, Sarah chose to move away from the ranch, settling in Albuquerque where James had his practice. It was hard for Josephine to see her daughter go, but she was proud of the capable, independent woman Sarah had become. "She is like you," Quinton observed the day they said goodbye to Sarah and James. "Strong and determined, ready to make her own way in the world." "I hope her way is easier than mine was," Josephine said, wiping away tears. "It will be," Quinton assured her, "because we gave her the tools she needs to face whatever comes. We gave her love and confidence and education. She will be fine." And Sarah was fine. She and James prospered in Albuquerque, and within a few years, they had given Josephine and Quinton 2 more grandchildren to dote on. As Quinton and Josephine moved into their 60s, they began to step back from the daily running of the ranch, leaving more and more of the work to Marcus and his growing family. They still kept busy Josephine with her garden and her correspondence with Sarah and the various church activities she had become involved in over the years. Quinton with maintenance projects around the ranch and mentoring Marcus in the finer points of ranch management. But they also made time for each other, for long rides across the land they had built their life on, for quiet evenings on the porch watching sunsets, for Sunday dinners surrounded by children and grandchildren. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, Quinton surprised Josephine by taking her back into Pinyon, to the exact spot where she had once sat selling wildflowers by the roadside. "What are we doing here?" Josephine asked, confused. Quinton dismounted and helped her down from her horse, then walked her to the side of the road. "This is where I first saw you," he said. "Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," Josephine said. "How could I forget?" "I have been back here a few times over the years," Quinton admitted. "Just to remember that day, to remind myself how close I came to riding right past you. What if I had been in a hurry that morning? What if I had not noticed you sitting here? My whole life would have been different." "But you did notice," Josephine said, stepping closer to him. "You did stop. You bought all my flowers and you changed everything." "No," Quinton said, cupping her face in his work-worn hands. "You changed everything. You brought love and laughter back into my life. You gave me children and grandchildren. You made the Triple I a home instead of just a ranch. Everything good in my life stems from this moment, from the day I found you here." "We found each other," Josephine corrected, tears streaming down her face. "That is what really happened. We found each other exactly when we both needed to." Quinton kissed her there, by the side of the road, in the same spot where their story had begun 30 years earlier. And Josephine kissed him back, loving him as much in that moment as she had on the day they married, perhaps even more after all the years and experiences they had shared. When they returned to the ranch that evening, they found their family waiting for them with a surprise anniversary celebration. Marcus and Elizabeth and their 3 children were there, and Sarah and James and their 2 children had traveled from Albuquerque. The ranch hands had cleaned up the barn and decorated it with lanterns and wildflowers that Sarah had arranged for, knowing how much they meant to her parents' story. As Josephine walked into the barn and saw all the people she loved gathered there, saw the wildflowers everywhere, she started to cry happy tears. Quinton pulled her close, and together they stood there, overwhelmed by the love surrounding them. Marcus stood up to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "When I was growing up, Dad used to tell me the story of how he met Mom, how she was selling wildflowers by the roadside and he bought them all. He always said it was the best purchase he ever made. As a kid, I thought it was just a nice story. But now, as a husband and father myself, I understand what he really meant. He did not just buy flowers that day. He found his partner, his love, his everything. And Mom, you took a chance on a lonely rancher and made him the happiest man alive. You both showed us what real love looks like, the kind that lasts through hard times and good times, through struggles and triumphs. The kind that only gets stronger with time. Thank you for that example. Thank you for this family. Thank you for everything." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and Josephine had to wipe tears from her eyes as Quinton held her close. The celebration lasted late into the night, with music and dancing and stories and laughter. At one point, Josephine found herself standing with Sarah, watching Quinton dance with little Lily, his great-granddaughter now 5 years old and absolutely enchanted with her grandfather. "Are you happy, Mama?" Sarah asked. "I am more than happy," Josephine said. "I am fulfilled. I have lived a good life, Sarah. A life full of love and purpose. I have a husband who adores me, children who make me proud, grandchildren who bring me joy. What more could I possibly want? I am glad," Sarah said, hugging her mother. "You deserve all of it after everything you went through." "The hard times made me appreciate the good times more," Josephine said. "I would not change anything about my journey because it led me here." The years continued to pass, each one a gift. Quinton and Josephine watched their grandchildren grow up, saw some of them marry and have children of their own. The Triple I remained prosperous under Marcus's management, and the Irving name became synonymous with quality cattle throughout New Mexico, which had achieved statehood in 1912. As they grew older, Quinton and Josephine's health inevitably began to decline, but they faced it as they had faced everything else in their life together. When Quinton had a heart attack in 1920 at the age of 70, Josephine nursed him back to health with fierce determination. And when Josephine fell and broke her hip 2 years later, Quinton barely left her side during her long recovery. "We are getting old," Quinton observed one evening as they sat on their porch, as they had done countless times over the past 40 years. "We have earned the right to be old," Josephine said. "We have lived well and loved well. We have nothing to regret." "No regrets at all," Quinton agreed. "Except perhaps that we will not have forever together. I worry about what will happen when one of us is gone." "Don't," Josephine said firmly, taking his hand. "We have had more time together than most people ever get, more love than most people ever know. When the time comes, we will face it the way we have faced everything else, with courage and faith. And whoever is left behind will carry on, because that is what we do. We carry on, we love, we remember." Quinton raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Josephine Irving. I have loved you for 43 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left, and beyond that." "And I love you," Josephine said. "You are my heart, Quinton. You always have been, from that day you bought all my wildflowers." They sat in peaceful silence, as the sun set over the land they had loved and worked for so many years, grateful for every moment they had been given, grateful for the life they had built together from such humble beginnings. Quinton Irving passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1925, at the age of 75. He had spent the previous day riding the fence line with Marcus, checking on the cattle, doing the work he loved. That evening, he and Josephine had dinner surrounded by family, and he had gone to bed with his wife beside him, as he had for more than 45 years. When Josephine woke the next morning and realized he was gone, she felt as if part of her soul had been torn away. But she did not fall apart. She grieved, deeply and truly, but she also carried on, because that was what Quinton would have wanted. At his funeral, held at the ranch with what seemed like the entire population of Pinyon and the surrounding area in attendance, Josephine spoke about the man she had loved. "Quinton Irving was a good man," she said, her voice strong despite her grief. "He was honest and hardworking and kind. He built this ranch with his own 2 hands and a will of iron. But more than that, he built a family. He built a legacy of love and decency that will continue long after we are all gone. He gave me everything: a home, a family, a purpose, a love that sustained me through every trial. I was selling wildflowers by the roadside when he found me. I had nothing. I was nothing. But he saw something in me worth saving, and he gave me a chance. He bought all my flowers that day, and somewhere along the way, he bought my heart too. I gave it to him freely and joyfully, and I never regretted it for a single moment. He was my great love, and I was his, and that is a rare and precious thing. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will also be grateful every day that I had him at all." Josephine lived for another 5 years after Quinton's death. She remained at the ranch, helping Marcus and Elizabeth, doting on her great-grandchildren, tending her garden, and keeping alive the memory of the man she had loved. On warm days, she would sometimes ride out to the spot by the roadside where she had once sold wildflowers, where Quinton had first noticed her and changed both their lives forever. She would sit there for a while, remembering, and somehow she always felt closer to him in that place. In the summer of 1930, at the age of 72, Josephine Irving passed away quietly, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She had lived a full life, a good life, a life far beyond anything she could have imagined that desperate day when she had sat by the roadside trying to sell wildflowers to survive. They buried her next to Quinton in the ranch cemetery, under a large oak tree that provided cool shade. On her headstone, Marcus had inscribed the words she had spoken so many years ago. "We found each other exactly when we both needed to." At her funeral, Sarah read from a letter Josephine had written to her children to be opened after her death. "My dear ones," the letter said, "if you are reading this, then I have gone to join your father, and I hope you are not too sad. I have had a wonderful life, full of love and joy and purpose. I want you to remember that life can change in an instant, that hope can appear when you least expect it, that love can be found in the most unlikely places. I was alone and desperate once, trying to survive however I could. And then a man rode up to my little flower stand and bought everything I had, and somehow in that moment, we both knew. We knew we had found what we had been looking for, even though neither of us had known we were looking. Love like that is a gift, and if you are lucky enough to find it, hold on to it with both hands. Treasure it. Nurture it. Let it sustain you through the hard times. Your father and I built our life on a foundation of love and respect and partnership, and it carried us through everything. I hope you have all found that kind of love, or will find it. I hope you know how proud I am of each of you, how grateful I am to have been your mother. Tell your children about the flower girl and the rancher, about how sometimes the most beautiful love stories start in the most ordinary moments. Live well, love deeply, and remember that even when life seems impossible, hope is always there, waiting to be found. With all my love always, Mama. There was not a dry eye among the mourners. Years passed, and the story of Josephine and Quinton Irving became part of the family legend, passed down from generation to generation. Their great-great-grandchildren would ride past that spot by the roadside and point it out to their own children. That is where it all began, they would say. That is where great-great-grandma was selling wildflowers, and great-great-grandpa bought them all, and they fell in love and built the Triple I into what it is today. The ranch continued to prosper, still owned and operated by Irving descendants, still a testament to what two people could build when they found each other at exactly the right moment and had the courage to take a chance on love. And every spring, without fail, wildflowers bloomed all around the ranch, purple verbena and golden desert marigolds and pink evening primrose and bright red Indian paintbrush, a natural memorial to the flower girl who became a beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and the heart of a family that would endure for generations. The story of how Josephine Zimmerman had been selling wildflowers by the roadside and Quinton Irving had bought them all became more than just a family story. It became a testament to the power of kindness, the possibility of hope in desperate circumstances, and the transformative nature of true love. It reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives come from the smallest moments, from a simple decision to stop and notice someone in need, from a willingness to take a chance on something unknown. In the end, theirs was a love story worthy of the Wild West, full of courage and determination, built on respect and partnership, enduring through hardship and triumph. It was a love story that started with wildflowers and grew into something that would bloom forever in the hearts and memories of all who knew them and all who came after. The Triple I Ranch still stands today, a working ranch that has adapted to modern times while maintaining the values Quinton and Josephine instilled: hard work, integrity, compassion, and the understanding that people are always more important than profits. Every owner of the ranch has kept alive the tradition started by Josephine all those years ago. Fresh wildflowers are always present in the main house, a reminder of where they came from and the love that built everything they have. On the wall of that house hangs a faded photograph from 1909, taken on Quinton and Josephine's 30th anniversary. In it, they stand by the roadside, the place where they first met, holding hands and smiling at each other with a love so obvious it transcends the old photograph. Beside the photograph hangs a pressed wildflower bouquet, preserved under glass, the last bouquet Quinton ever bought from Josephine on that fateful day in 1878. And so their story lives on, a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that kindness can change lives, and that sometimes all it takes is someone willing to stop, to see to care. A reminder that the best love stories are not the ones that start with certainty and ease, but the ones that start with courage and hope, with two people deciding to take a chance on each other despite the odds. Josephine had been selling wildflowers by the roadside, just trying to survive another day. Quinton had bought them all, and in doing so, had bought himself a lifetime of love, partnership, and happiness. She had given him her heart freely and completely, and he had treasured it every single day of his life. It was a simple beginning to an extraordinary love story, the kind that people still talk about more than 100 years later. The kind that reminds us all that magic can happen on dusty roadsides in small New Mexico towns, that hope can bloom even in the harshest soil, and that love, when it is true and real and brave, can build something that will last forever. Their love had started with wildflowers and grown into a legacy that would never fade, a love story for the ages, a testament to what is possible when two hearts recognize each other and have the courage to leap into the unknown together. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after this life, Quinton and Josephine are together still, walking hand in hand through fields of eternal wildflowers, their love as fresh and vibrant as it was on that first day when he stopped his horse by the roadside, and she looked up at him with hope in her green eyes, and both of their lives changed forever in the best possible way.